Good morning. Today we're going to read chapter 14. You might hear my dogs in the background because they're out here in my backyard playing because it's so sunny and beautiful. Chapter 14. Francisco and Salvador had managed to escape into the bushes, but Dominic and Antonio weren't so lucky. Together they stood frozen with fear before the biggest and scariest looking man Dominic had ever seen. Tiburo Radazi was a mountainous creature with a broad, hairy chest that burst at the seams of his black leather vest. His long, tree-trunk-like legs carried his torso high into the air. His voice was a thunderous roar. In his powerful fist, Radazi gripped a polished wooden handle of a homemade whip. Its long, thin branches had been sharpened into razor-like points and dusted with light. Suddenly, with his free hand, Radazi grabbed Antonio by the scuffle of his neck. "Now I have you," he growled, and his thick lips curled into a snarl. "And I'll whip you for the fruit that you've stolen today, yesterday, and the day before that." Antonio's face had gone white, and his eyes were glassy with fear. "Let him go," Dominic shouted, taking a step closer to him. His heart raced as his breath quickened. Dominic had never been so frightened in his life, but he couldn't stop moving closer. "Let him go," he shouted. "I stole the cherries." "Oh, so you want to take his place?" Radazzi laughed as he let go of Antonio and grabbed hold of Dominic's neck. Sausage and the others cheered. "You have a little more meat on your bones anyways," hissed Radazzi as Dominic struggled to catch his breath. A second later, the giant had released his vice grip on Dominic's neck and was throwing him over his lap. "More skin for the lashes to mark," he growled. Dominic felt faint as he caught sight of the large whip being raised into the air. He closed his eyes tight on hearing the loud whoosh as it came down and ripped through his t-shirt, opening the skin on his back. A deadly silence followed as Sausage and the others were stilled by the frightening sight of Radazzi's handiwork. Then, with a satisfied grunt, the giant lifted his whip once more. Just at that moment, a flying cloud of manure sailed through the air and struck him in the back of the head. Sleeping with anger, Radazzi stood up, letting Dominic fall to the ground. The giant took one step forward, but then tripped and let out a painful cry. Everyone looked in astonishment as he lay slumped over on the ground, moaning, holding his chest. While Sausage and his group ran to Radazzi's side, Dominic grabbed Antonio's hand and they took off. "Stop! Thieves! They're stinking thieves!" Sausage shouted as he looked over his shoulder and watched them run away. "This way!" Francisco cried as he came up beside Dominic and Antonio. Salvador had run around an olive tree and met them on the other side. The loud insults of the boys echoed after them as they raced through the orchard. They didn't stop running until they had gone through the fields to the edge of the village. Once they had come to an old stone barn, the boys sank down in one of the stalls to rest. "I wonder what happened to the giant," Antonio whispered. "Did you see the way he fell onto the ground? Did you see him ever stand up again?" asked Salvador. "I had to turn around to look," Francisco said. Do you think he was having a heart attack?" asked Dominic. "Did you see the way he was grabbing his chest?" "No," Francisco assured him. "I think he was just surprised by what hit him, although turning the other cheek would have been a far better solution." He glared at Salvador. Salvador looked worried. "Didn't mean to hurt him," he said. "I only threw manure so that we'd leave Dominic alone." Then Salvador looked guilty at Francisco. "What's the matter with you?" Francisco asked, giving Salvador's arm a gentle shove. Salvador studied the ground as he whispered, "I dropped the net, and then I forgot to pick it up. And I forgot to pick up the birds." "What?" Francisco began to shout. "What are you saying? That you lost our dinner? When you were going to learn to keep your mouth shut?" "What do you mean?" Salvador asked. "What did I say?" Francisco reminded him, poking him each time he said it. "Why did you have to tell him he was made like a mushroom? If you didn't insult the pig boy, he wouldn't have called for the giant." The thought of Sausage being made like a mushroom suddenly struck Dominic as funny. He began to laugh uncontrollably, and soon the others joined in. But when the laughter died down, Antonio became serious. "I'm lucky Dominic was there," he said. He rested his curly blonde head against Dominic's arm. He said that his head was warm and moist with the smell of little boy's sweat. The boys nodded their head as Antonio recounted blow by blow the entire episode of how Dominic historically saved him from the whip. As Antonio spoke, Dominic remembered the words of the old man back at the museum. "Open your heart, little one, and all that you need shall be yours." He wasn't sure just what those words meant, but he was sure of one thing. Somehow these boys had opened his heart and made him care. But to care about someone else, someone he could lose, was terrifying to Dominic. And it was as terrifying as it was exciting. As he sat there thinking of all of this, Francisco grabbed Dominic by the shoulders and pulled him close. "You took a lashing from my brother," Francisco said. "From this day forward, you are family. We shall treat you as one of us." Dominic felt a lump in his throat. He tried to talk, but the words wouldn't come. No one in his entire life has ever called him family. But those boys were different. They genuinely liked him, and Francisco, his favorite, said the words Dominic had waited to hear his whole life. "You are family." Dominic let the words play over and over in his mind. Tomorrow we will read chapter 15.